is Daf Ayin Zayin, or Az Kinamer, right? And we are the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, it's a very long daf, so let's just get started. We'll go as quickly as we can. We are close to the end, like 6 days more. And Charlie's thinking about the Siyam already. I'm up for whatever happens, Charlie, but we'll continue the discussion. The Mishnah continues with the next. We talked a lot about, people who are pasul, people went up from Bavel with Ezra, and what happens to the children, the offspring of Sulim. This Mishnah gets to the next case, which is a halal. Okay, and a halal is a kohen who marries a person who's pasul to the kohen. The offspring is a halal. Halal literally means, chilulin, made, unholy, let's say. But obviously a halal is a Yisrael. Halal is Jewish. There's no aspect of that. Obviously, you never become not Jewish. And furthermore, a halal is like Yisrael and all other issues that they can marry a Kohen. They can marry, Yisrael. They can marry a Levi. They cannot marry a Kohen. A Kohen is asur to marry a halal, right? And they also, not only can they not marry a Kohen, but they lose the status of Kuhuna. So a Kohen usually eats truma, a Kohen gets the first aliyah, a Kohen does birkat kohanim. A halal is not supposed to do any of those things. They are treated like a Yisrael, right? So it happens today, of course. Says the Mishnah, Abat Halal Zachar, the daughter of a male halal, so a halal whose father, let's say, married a grusha, and he was a halal, his daughter is psula min hakuna. She cannot marry a kohen. She's a halala, le'olam, forever. Now we'll see in the Gemara, what does that mean forever, right? She obviously her whole life. What do you mean by forever? Yisrael shenasa halala, but the opposite, if you have a female who's a halala, and her father, her husband is a Yisrael, and they get married and they have a kid, Bitok Shera Lekuna, their daughter would be kosher for Kuhuna. Halal Shenasa Bat Yisrael, and the third case, which seems like the first case, is that a male halal who marries a Bat Yisrael, Bitok Psula Lekuna. The daughter is Pasul Lekuna. The Gemara is going to ask if that seems repetitive, and it is. Rabbi Yehuda says, I disagree with this halacha. Abat ger zachar kibat halal. Now we're going to see where ger came into this category from, right? Why we all of a sudden bring ger, which we've done a lot in the Gemara, right? Bringing in a ger. But the daughter of a ger, who's a zachar, right? Meaning the father is a convert, is a ger. The daughter of that ger is kibat halal, meaning, just like we said by a bat halal that she is asr lekuhuna, the daughter of a ger would be asr lekuhuna. Of course, she's not a halala, but she's a bat ger, and so she has the status of a ger. Further, says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, disagreeing, Yisrael shenasa gioret, a male who marries a woman who converted, right? She bitok shera lekuna, their daughter would actually be permitted to a kohen, because since the mother is a gioret, the daughter, just like a halal, goes after the father, who's a Yisrael, and therefore the daughter is Yisrael, and she's much to marry a kohen. And the opposite, ger shenasa bat Yisrael, the opposite is true also. A male ger who marries a bat Yisrael, bitok shera lekuhuna. So according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, if either parent is a Yisrael and the other parent's a ger, the child does not have any limitations of marrying a kohen like a ger or a gioret would have. Aval, in the first wide line, says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, ger shenasa gioret, if both the father and the mother are converts, then their daughter is still, or their son, but their daughter too, bito psula lekuhuna, because she is also considered to be a ger, even though she's not. She's the child of two people who converted. She is also pasul lekuhuna. And continues the Gemara, the Mishnah, echad ger v'echad evav of the dimishucharim, both a ger, or children of a ger, or slaves who are freed, who are essentially converted, they're Evi Kanani, who became free, afilu ad asara dorot, they are still considered gerim, and therefore asur to a kohen for 10 generations, meaning even more, achete imom Yisrael, unless the ger marries a woman who's a Yisrael, and then the child is not considered to be asur to a kohen. That's the second opinion in the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. And Rabbi Yossi says, no, doesn't matter at all. Af ger shenasa gioret, even a convert who marries a woman who converted, a convert, bitok shera lekuhuna, their children are not converts, they're Yisraelim, and they are permitted to marry the Kohen, even the first generation. Now,
we sometimes have the Gemara referring to descendants of converts being Gerim. We even had one of those recently. Like
Sorry, say
yes,
that again. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So 100%. There are times, again, it could be there's people who hold that lineage goes, and of course, I think we've discussed this before that there were
yeah.
certainly communities where Gerim married each other, right? They sort of stayed within the faith almost, right? Okay, and that's what we talk about. But also there are communities that converted together, right? So it might make sense if
Hmm.
a certain community came and converted that they sort of stay within their community. But yeah, what you said is definitely true separately. Even if the child is not considered to be a ger or their identity is that of a ger, right? So they could talk about the child being a family of gerim. Now, says the Gemara, my olam. What do you mean that they're asur forever? What do you mean forever? Says the Gemara, because my time I would have thought, remember the prohibitions of marrying a mitzri or a person from Edom only go for 2 generations. Dar shlishi, the 3rd generation, is permitted, meaning a mitzri who converts, that person's dar rishon, their children are dar sheni, their grandchildren are dar shlishi, and they're permitted to marry into Yisrael. So you might have thought that the same thing is true about a halal. A Kohen marries a grusha, their child is a halal. You might have thought that that prohibition doesn't extend forever. It only extends for a few generations. You would have thought, they're permitted. That they're not. That a chalalut continues, I would say, not forever, unless you do what was done in our Mishnah, where perhaps the mother was a halala, but the father was not. Wait, who's got the Stan? Can you mute for us if you hear us? Got a lot of background from you. I don't know if he hears us. Okay, we'll try. Continues the Mishnah, Yisrael shenasah halala, minani mili. How do you know that that's true? That if a Yisrael marries a halala, that the child is not a halal, right? That a Yisrael shenasah halala, because the mother's a halala, the child is kasher, the bitok shera lakuna. How do you know that it doesn't go after the mother? Minani mili, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon, and some say Rabbi Ishmael, Nemar kan v'lo yichalel zaro ba'amav. Right? It says by a Kohen Gadol who marries an almana or a grusha that he shouldn't do it, and he should not be mechalel. He should not profane his children. V'nemar la'alan. It says in the same parsha, lo yitameh ba'al ba'amav, that a husband of a Kohen Gadol, right, or others depending on the case, cannot become tameh if other people can. Kohen's not supposed to come tameh unless there's very specific exceptions. Just like the whole question of a Kohen not becoming Tameh only applies to male Kohanim, not Nikevot, not the women. Afkan, here too, the issue of Chalalim only applies to Scharim, meaning if the male is a Halal, but not if the female is a Halal and the husband is a Yisrael. Elamiatis is well, if that's true, then why don't you say that even children who are female are not Halalim, Halalot, I guess, Halala, right? So what about Bito Kohen Gadol history? Kohen Gadol marries an almana, which he's not allowed to do. His daughter should not be a halal because you say it only applies to men, not to women. Says we're no. Miktiv bino. It doesn't say lo yichalal bino. Don't be mechalal your son. Zaroktiv. It says don't be mechalal your children, implying both men and female, right? Lo yichalal zaro ba'amav. Okay, so it says more. What about bat binot history? But why do you say? Remember, the Mishnah said that a daughter is a halala who has a child. That child becomes permitted. But why? What about a son who's a halal? Why don't you say any descendant is permitted? That should also be permitted. You got it? Because it says lo yichal zaro. Makish zaro lo. It compares his children, meaning his son, to him. Mahu, just like the Kohen Gadol sleeps with an almana bito psula, af bino bito psula. So to his son, the son's daughter would be puzzle. So what about bat bito? So why don't you use the same logic to say his granddaughter from a daughter would be puzzle? Titzar, right? In King Zereshava, Mayahanile. So then, what's the point of Zereshava saying that it only applies to men and not to women? So there must be a difference, and the difference is that daughters don't carry it over; sons will carry it over. And so that's the opinion in our Mishnah that a woman who's a halala, whose children are not halalim, right? So again, a woman who's a halala who marries a Yisrael or a Levi has a son. That son is not a halal. He's not a Kohen, of course, right? He lost the status of Kuna. His mother's a Kohenet, but he's not, right? Or halala, I guess. But he is kosher, and he can marry a Kohen or anyone else who he wants to, a Kohenet. Continued the Mishnah. We're at the 2 dots now, around third of the way down. Koshi. Halal shenasa bat Yisrael bito psula. A man who's a halal who marries a bat Yisrael, that carries forward. His child, his daughter, is still a halala, and he can't marry a Kohen. This is more Tanalei Reisha. It's the first case we said in the Mishnah. Bat Chalal Zachar Psula Min Hakuna. Right? This is where you're right. It's the exact same case. Meaning it's parallel, right? We want to say the female, we want to say the male, we repeat it for that reason. Now says the Gemara, very, very important. Our Mishnah goes against the opinion that we've had 3 times already, according to the Masoret HaShas on the right, recently, of Rabbi Yistai Rabbi Yehuda. And what is that opinion of Rabbi Yistai Rabbi Yehuda, Tanya? Rabbi Yistai ben Yehuda Omer, Kishem Shebnei Yisrael Mikvat Tara L'Chalalot. Just like everybody agrees in our Mishnah, that a woman who's a Chalala who marries a Yisrael becomes purified. Now, what does it mean they become purified? Their children are not Chalalim, right? The children are permitted to marry a Kohen. They're not Kohanim, of course, but they're permitted to marry a Kohen, right? They're not a Chalal anymore. Says Rav Dustai Yehuda, it works the other way too. Kach benot Yisrael mikvat hara the Chalalim. So too, marrying a Chalal who marries a Bat Yisrael, or a Bat Levi for sure, their children are regular people. They're not Kohanim again, but they are pure in the sense that they can marry Kohanim as a Yisrael, basically, right? So kach benot Yisrael mikvet tara l'chalalim. My time to describe Rabbi Yehuda, because Amar Kra lo yichalel zaro be'amav. It says that be'amav. What does that mean? Be'am echad hu demechal. They are chulin. They are not kosher for kahuna if it's the same am, right? Meaning the same group. But b'shnei amimim, if there's a Yisrael involved, Eno Michalel, that dilutes the psul, and they're no longer chalalim. Mirabanan, around halfway down. Says the Braita, where am I? I lost it. Tanu Rabbanan, Lo Yichalel Zaro. What does the pasuk mean when it says you should not sleep with a woman and therefore turn your descendants into chalalim? Ainli ela Zaro. I only know that your descendants become chalalim. He atzmo minayin. How do you know that the woman, let's say a Eshet Kohen, a Bat Kohen, sorry, is a almana, a divorcee. That's not almana, a widow, and she sleeps with a Kohen Gadol, which she's not allowed to do. So their children are halalim. How do you know he atzma minayin? How do you know that the woman herself also becomes a halala? And although she was born a Bat Kohen, she no longer can eat truma. She no longer is kosher, to do the things the Kohanim do, which is mostly eat truma. Amrit kal v'chomer, says the Braita, it's a kal v'chomer. Ma zaro, the children that she has, shalav avera, they didn't do anything wrong, but they become chalalim, right? Which of course is the terrible reality of all these psulim, right? It all affects the kids who didn't do anything wrong. So just like a child who didn't do, or not, it's a kal v'chomer. If a child who didn't do anything wrong, but their parents had an inappropriate relationship, that child is a halal. The mother, Sha'avra Aveira, she did something wrong by sleeping with someone she's not allowed to sleep with. Remember, she's a widow and she married a Kohen Gadol. Eno din she mitchalelet. Shouldn't she for sure become puzzle from being a Kohen? Says more, but that's not a great proof at all, because what about the man? Right? The man himself, hu atzmo yochiach, avad Aveira, he did something wrong. He slept with the woman he's not allowed to sleep with. But he doesn't become puzzle as a Kohen. He doesn't lose his status as a Kohen. Ein mitchalel. He doesn't become cholulin. He can eat truma. He can work in the Beit HaMikdash. He's a Kohen Gadol, right? Says more. So that goes against your kal v'chomer. Says more. Well, that's not. Men don't really count. Malahu shekin ein mitchala b'chol makom. Men. So the Rashi explains it, right? Men never become puzzle by their actions. Again, why that's the case we don't know. Tomar bihi shemitchalot b'chol makom. The mother does become mitchalelet if she does something wrong, even if she does other things wrong. For example, she is, let's say, a zona, which means she has an illicit relationship, say, with a non-Jew. So she would lose her status to allow her to marry a Kohen. And therefore, you could say that kal v'chomer from the mother to the child. Continues the Braita, from the child to the mother. V'im nafshach lomer, and if you don't like that explanation, then Amar Kra, in fact, there's a pasuk. The pasuk says, lo yichalel zaro, which means, lo yichulal zeh, meaning you shouldn't become impure, or not impure. I keep using the word impure, but chilulin. You shouldn't become regular, let's say. Meaning a person who was once born as a Bat Kohen shouldn't become not a Bat Kohen through this action, implying that you can change the action not just through birth. Stan, can you hear us? Can you mute on your end? I have a lot of background from you. I don't know, Stan, if you can hear us. There you are. I wish I could do it on my end. Okay, I guess not. We'll keep going. So that's the pro. So we are, I'm trying to see where we are. I know it's the middle of Daf Ayin Zayin Amud Aleph Az, and we are around 15 lines from the bottom. The first word on the line, which is the word Mai. Mai im nafshach lomer. What do you mean? Why do you have to come up with a second explanation for why the woman who slept with the Kohen Gadol inappropriately, the Almanah, herself becomes a Chalala? What was the problem with the Kal V'chomer? Says the Gemara, because there's a problem with the Kal V'chomer. V'chi tema, you might have said, you got a problem with the Kal V'chomer. Ma l'zaro shekein yitzirato ba'avera. The zaro is puzzle because they were created, they were conceived in an act that was wrong, right? A bat kohen, almanah marrying sleeping with a kohen gadol. So therefore, Amar Kra lo yichalel. Therefore, we have a separate extra letter in the pasuk. It could have said lo yichal without the second lamed. Why did it say yichalel? Lo yichulal zeh sheyakasher v'nitchalel. You shouldn't become chulin, meaning you started off okay. The woman was born as a bat kohen, and she became chiluli. Nu Rabbanan. How do we get into
Stanley, there's a huge amount of background noise. Can you do something? Please mute yourself.
Thank you, Charlie. I don't know if he hears us, but I'm gonna put in the chat. Give me 1 second. Okay, let's keep going. So says the Gemara. Let me get the point right. We're Tanu Rabbanan, right? We are again. It's real hard to say exactly where we are because it's the middle of the daf, but around 14 lines from the bottom, third to last word on the line. Tanu Rabbanan. Ezuhi chalala. Who is a person who's a chalala? Says the Braita Kol Shnoda min hapsulim. Anyone who's born from a puzzle relationship, from psulim. My psulim. What does that mean? Ilem psulim lo. Does it mean anyone who's in part of an illicit relationship? What about a Yisrael? Remember, Yisrael is not allowed to remarry a woman he divorced. If a man, anyone, Kohen, of course, can't marry Grusha ever, but a Yisrael and a Levi can marry a divorced woman. But if they were married to a woman, divorced her, and then she remarried someone else in between, and then that person died or divorced her, and she wants to remarry her first husband, that's prohibited, right? But there's no concept that that child will become a chalala and can't marry a Kohen, right? Hari machzir grushato dipsula lo. She's not allowed to marry him. The children are allowed to marry a Kohen. Dichtiv toevahi, because it says clearly she is a toeva, the woman who you married. He toeva ve'im banato avim. It doesn't extend to her children. So what does it mean? Anyone who's puzzle is not allowed to marry a Kohen. Amr Yehuda hachikama. Ezehi chalala. Anyone who's born from a union that was possible for a Kohen. Now that implies, says the Gemara, nolda in, if you were born from a union, but lo nolda lo, that if you just slept with the person you're not allowed to as a Kohen, you're not a chalala. But we just discussed earlier, 5 lines ago, Hare almana, grusha, vizona, all these categories of people who are almana to a Kohen Gadol, a widow, a grusha, divorcee to Kohen Hedyot or Kohen Gadol, and a zona, a woman who, we'll see what zona means, but a woman who had slept with someone they're not allowed to. They're all of these people, lo noda, they weren't born in that relationship. They had that relationship, but kahavi chalala. And they're all people who are not allowed to marry a Kohen or a Kohen Gadol. Amar Rabba Hachikam. No, this is what the Braita means to say. Ezu chalala muskeret. What is a chalala who's mentioned in the Torah? Shalo hayalashata kosher klal, that never had a time in their life that they were allowed to marry a Kohen. That's a person who's nolda, kol shenolda mim psul kuhuna. They were born out of a union that was puzzled to a Kohen, like a divorcee. My muskeret. What does it mean, muskeret? They're mentioned. We're 7 lines from the bottom. She'ikra midivrei Torah. That the Torah mentions specifically, don't do this. We don't need any, you don't need any parsha, you don't need to read Rashi or the Gemara or any mafarish to explain what the Torah is referring to. It's the simple pshat of the Torah. That's where your nodam imsulei kuna. The Torah clearly says, don't sleep. A Kohen Gadol should not sleep with a woman who's an almanah, because if he does, the children will be chalalim. Tanur Rabbanan now, 6 lines in the bottom. Almanah, almanah, almanah. A woman who is an almanah 3 times. And we're going to ask in a second, what that means, almanah 3 times. But a woman who's an almanah 3 times is eino chai v'lachat. If a kohen gadol sleeps with a woman who's an almanah 3 times, he's not chayav 3 times, he's chayav once. Grusha. If a kohen hedyot sleeps with a woman who's a grusha 3 times, eino chayav v'lachat. He's also only chayav for one prohibition. Now, of course, we can all venture guesses of what that means, 3 times divorce. It can mean a woman who's divorced 3 times from 3 different husbands. It could mean, we'll see what else it can mean, but we'll discuss that in a minute. The third case of the Braita, 5 lines from the bottom, is let's say you have a woman who is all 3. She's an almana, gusha, v'chalala zona. She's a divorced woman, a widowed woman. I keep saying divorce. She's an almana. She's a divorced woman, and she's a chalala zona, right? Which presumably, again, can mean many things. But let's say she slept with someone who is a prohibition to her. That makes her a chalala zona. So says the Braita, Bisman Shehem Keseder, if she became those people in order, meaning first she was a widow, then she married a second guy and he divorced her. Then she slept with an inappropriate person. Then chayav al kol achat v'achat. If a kohen gadol sleeps with her, he's chayav 3 times because he slept with an almana, with a grusha, and with a chalala zona. But all at once. But she has 3 statuses. But if it was the opposite order, that first she was zinta, so she became a chalala zona, she slept with someone inappropriate, and then she was a nitchalala, and then she was nitgarsha, and then she married someone and got divorced, and then she married someone and became a widow, nitarmala, then eno chayiv elachat. If you do it in that order, you're only chayiv once. Or not if you did it in that order, she became it in that order. So that is an interesting statement in the Braita. The Gemara is going to try to unpack both parts of the Braita. First part is, Amar 3 lines from the bottom, Amana, you chayiv elachat. A 3-time amana, you're only chayiv once. What does that mean? Hi amana hechidam. In lema, does it mean that she was married 3 times, that you slept with 3 almanot, right? You're a kohen gadol, and you're not allowed to sleep with an almana. But first, you slept with the almana of Ruvain, Shabbat almanat Ruvain. Then you slept with the almanat Shimon. Then you slept with the almanat Levi. So kohen gadol really didn't follow this rule, right? And he slept with 3. I don't know which Kohanim Gedolim, but maybe in certain times, he slept with an almanah of 3 different people. Says Gemara, so why am I in a chayv elachat? Why would you only be chayv once? Turn the page, the Ayin Zayin Amud Bet, another long daf. Harei gufin muchlakim, harei shemot muchlakim. They're different people. They're different names, meaning they're different. It's not so clear why you need to have shemot muchlakim. There's a discussion here in Tosfot. But anyways, these are very clearly separate averot. It's the same averot 3 times, but you did it 3 different things. You slept with woman A, woman B, and woman C. Ella, the case must be, second line, sheba al amana achat shalosh biyot. You slept 3 times with one woman. So she's a widow, and you slept with an almana. Right? Says Gemara, well, so the question is, are you chayiv 3 times? It depends on whether there was a separation between the acts, right? Just like we talked about in Shabbos and every other lo taseh. If you eat something treif twice, the question is, did you know in the middle? Did you have azara in the middle? Is it 2 actions or not? Hechidami. If they didn't warn you between the 3 times, you did 1 action. Ella, if they atrube, they gave you hatra'ah, they gave you a warning, meaning you slept with wife of Ruvain. Sorry, it's the same woman. You slept with her once. The rabbis came, or not the rabbis, the people came to you and said, you did something wrong. If you do it again, you're over a lo taseh, and you did it again. You did it a 3rd time. What's really not saying? Right? Why are you only chayiv 1? Vatnan. We learned in a Mishnah in the Sechet Nazir a couple months ago. Nazir haya shoteh yain kol hayom kulo. Right? A Nazir is not allowed to drink wine. This Nazir sat at the table and drank wine all day long. Says the Mishnah, he's only chayiv for 1 episode of drinking wine. But if they said to him, Amrullah, if they said to him all day long, al tishteh, don't drink. Well, it's better. Don't drink. Each one is considered to be a separate action of drinking. So why isn't it the same thing about a kohen gadol sleeping with an almanah? Lo tzricha, says the Gemara, 8 lines from the top, I believe. Sheba al almanat Ruvain, it's where he slept with 1 woman 1 time. But this woman happens to have collected a very large group of husbands. And she is now a widow from Ruvain, almanat Shahita, almanat Shimon, Shahita, almanat Levi. So she has three marriages under her belt, and all of them then died on her. So she is the widow of Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Now she goes and she sleeps with the Kohen Gadol. So Ma'od Tema, I would have thought, well, she's really a widow from three different people. So she's not one widow, right? She's Shemot Muchlakim. She's the widow of Reuven, of Shimon, and Levi. So I might have thought that because the names of her husbands or her status as a widow are different, that she'd be chayav 3 times. Kamash Malan, Gufim Muchlakim Ba'inam Veleka. You need to also have 3 different people to be chayav 3 times. And since she's one individual, and it was one time you slept with her, you're only chayav 1 time. That's the Kiddush of the Mishnah. Again, the right.
There's other discussions that a woman whose husbands keep dying on her enough, maybe she's not permitted to marry or be with anybody.
That's correct, but this Kohen Gadol chose to sleep with her, so that's that's his decision, I would say. But there certainly is that rule that if you sleep with two husbands die, right? The famous, we talked about Yehuda, right, saying that was the reason why he didn't want to give Tamar to his 3rd son, right? So, anyways, that is the case. Continues, so and the same thing would be true about Gusha, right? A woman who was divorced 3 times. Doesn't matter if a Kohen sleeps with her, he's only chayiv once. Continues the Gemara, now read a pasuk, right? If that's where you'll find it. Almana, this is a quote from the pasuk. Almana ugusha b'chalala zona lo yikachu. Right? Don't marry a divorced woman, a widow, a divorced, a chalala zona. Says the Gemara, and so our Mishnah, that our Braita said, if you marry a woman who became those things in that order, you're chayiv 3 times. Sleep with her, right? If you became in the wrong order, you're not only chayiv once. Says Gemara, Haitaina Micah Supper. So what does our Tana hold, right? Remember, we have a very famous question about whether you can have an Isur, Chal al Isur. If something, some action, some food is prohibited for one reason, and then it becomes prohibited for a second reason, can you be chayiv twice, right? If you have a piece of chalev that becomes basar b'chalav, right? You can't eat it because it's fats from an animal, but then it gets mixed with milk. So are you chayiv twice for eating it? Or if it's Yom Kippur, right? We've discussed all these cases many times, and we will continue to. Is Isur, is one prohibition chal on another prohibition? So it says what's the question here? Ika savar ein Isur chal Isur. Sorry, Isur chal Isur. If you hold that one prohibition comes on another, so ibchanami. Why won't you be chayiv 3 times, even if the woman was the opposite? She was first a zona, and then she became a grusha, and then she became an almana. You should be chayiv 3 times because you can add isurim. Ika savar, if the Tana holds ein isur chalal isur, that you can't add isurim on someone who's already asur to you, then afilo kaseder zenamilo. So even if you're in order of almana, then grusha, then chalal zona, why are you chayiv 3 times? Right? So I don't understand the opinion of the Braita. Amar Rava, this is what the Braita holds. The Braita holds Taitana isur chal isur letlay. He generally holds that if something is prohibited and another prohibition happens, it doesn't add a second lotasim because it's already prohibited to you. But if it adds something, isur mosif itlay. If it adds something, then it can be chal. So what's the case? Almana, a woman who's a widow, right? She's only prohibited to marry a Kohen Gadol, a Surah the Kohen Gadol, but Sharia the Kohen Hadyot, she can marry anyone else, including the Kohen Hadyot. Then she got married and she became divorced. So now Havile Grusha, she is now a category of Grusha. So Migo di Tosifle Isur the Gabi Kohen Hadyot, since she now has a new category of Grusha, which makes her prohibited to marry or sleep with a Kohen Hadyot, Itosifle Isur the Gabi Kohen Gadol. So now she's added an Isur to Kohen Gadol, and therefore she's also the Kohen Gadol twice. Because since the Isur, the status of Grusha, was chal on her for a Kohen Hadyot, it also is chal on her for a Kohen Gadol. But she's still a Kohenet, right? If she was a Bat Kohen, she's a Dayan Shari L'Mechal B'Truma. She's still allowed to eat Truma, nothing stopping her. And therefore, if she does a third action, and she becomes a Chalala by sleeping with someone she's not allowed to sleep with, right? Then Havile Chalala, and Migo di Itosif Isur L'Mechal B'Truma, so now she's not allowed to eat Truma, so she becomes a Chalala. And therefore, she's usher to a Kohen Gadol a third time. Itosif Isur legabe Kohen Gadol. So I get it. There's 3 prohibitions, and they all chal with Isur Mosif. Says Gemara, but that makes sense if she's a Chalala. But Elazona, my Isur Mosif Itba. Let's say she becomes a Zona. Let's just say, because there's a machloket about this, that she's sleeping with a non-Jew makes her a Zona. So, but that she can still eat Truma, right? It doesn't add, what does it add to her? Amar Rav Chana bar Rav Kedina, second to last of the narrow lines, Hoel v'shem znut posel b'Yisrael. No, now she potentially couldn't even sleep with a Yisrael. So therefore, she is added an Isser of Znut, and therefore it adds an Isser even for the Kohen Gadol, and he cannot sleep with her for 3 reasons. And therefore, because each one was Mosif, she's a Almana, Grusha, and Chalala Zona, and therefore he'd be chayiv 3 times. The other way wouldn't work, because if she first became a Chalala, and then a Grusha, and then a Almana, it wouldn't be Mosif any Yisur. Tani Tana Kamed Rav Sheshet. The Tana said in front of Rav Sheshet, Kol Shehu B'Yikach, Harehu B'Lo Yikach. Any person who has the prohibition of not the prohibition, but you're allowed to take them, we'll see what this means in a second, also has the category of Lo Yikach, right? Anyone who a Kohen Gadol should marry, which is Isha B'Petula Yikach, it says, right? Also falls into the category of Lo Yikach. What does that mean? We'll see in a second. Anyone who Kohen Gadol cannot marry doesn't fall into the category of a Kohen Gadol not being prohibited to marry, right? Prat, what is that telling you? The Prat the Kohen Gadol sheba al achoto almana. It excludes a Kohen Gadol who sleeps with his sister, which is obviously a very big prohibition, who's also an almana. Because she's not someone he could have married, he doesn't have a prohibition of almana. He's a prohibition of achoto. He's going to chayiv mita for that, but he doesn't have a prohibition of almana because since it was not yikach, it doesn't have a prohibition of don't marry her. Now, Amar le, Damar lechamani. So they said to Rav Sheshet, who told you that, right? Who said that? It's Rav Shimon. It must be Rav Shimon. Damar eini sur chalal isur, right? That she was his sister when she was born. So she was Asr. She then became an Almanah, but that Isser Almanah did not add on to the Isser of being a sister. The Tanya. How do we know Reb Shimon holds that? Reb Shimon Omer patur. If a person eats a nevela on Yom Kippur, you're patur from being over Yom Kippur, because since you couldn't eat it already because it was a nevela, you're not chayav basically for eating it also on Yom Kippur, right? The Rabbanan, if it went according to Rabbanan, Amri Isur Chalal Isur. An Isser can be chal on another Isser, and therefore a Kohen Gadol's sister, who's Asr to him because it's his sister, if she became an Almanah, should become Asr to him also because she's an Almanah, if you hold Isur Chalal Isser. Says the Gemara, that's not necessarily the case. We're 4 lines down from the wide lines. Afilu Tema Rabbanan. It could even be going according to the Rabbanan. Ki Ami Rabbanan Isur Chalal Isur, Hani Mili Isur Chamur Al Isur Kal. Maybe when the Rabbanan said that Yom Kippur, for example, is chal on food that's already not kosher, right? That's an isur chamur of Yom Kippur. That's chal al isur kal of say chelav. Al isur kal of, for example, an almanat or kohen gadol al isur chamur lo chayil. And therefore, even the chachamim would agree that ein isur chal al isur in this case, where it's not an isur chamur, it's not a stricter isur coming with the second one. That's one version. The Amrisam had the opposite version, that the statement was Hamani Rabbanan. This Braita, which says that a woman who is an Almanah but also a sister of a Kohen Gadol doesn't have a second prohibition. That's the Rabbanan. The Amr Isser Chalal Isser, who say that generally an Isser is Chalal Isser. Chi Amri Rabbanan Isser Chalal Isser, but when they say that, Hani Mili Isser Chamor. That's only true if the second Isser has extra layers that don't exist in the first Isur, al Isur Kal. Al Isur Kal, Isur Chamor Lo Chayil. The Reb Shimon, because if it was going according to Reb Shimon, who hashta Isur Chamor al Isur Kal Lo Chayil, Reb Shimon already says that Yom Kippur, which is much more Chamor than Chelev, right? It's a Chelev Kari, is not Chal Isur Kal, right? Isur Kal, Isur Chamor Mibai. Certainly, an Isur Kal of Amanah, the Kohen Gadol, would not be Chal Isur Chamor of Achoto, right? So that's not necessarily the case either, according to the second shot. Because Ma'adutema, I might have thought Isur Kumna Shani. It could be that although generally it's true that it's an Isur Kal and not more Chamor, when you come to Kohanim, you have a lot of extra rules. Rashi says, Sharibah Bahem Katuv Mitzvot Yiterot. There's a lot of rules by Kohanim. And so maybe with Kohen, an Isur can be Chal on Isur, even if it's an Isur Kal, and therefore the Braita had to say that that's not the case. Kamash Malan. Okay. We can keep going, right?
Mm-hmm.
Got minutes. Say Amar le Rav Papa le'Abaya. Said we are around 13 lines from the bottom. The first word on a line. Said Rav Papa to Abaya, Yisrael haba al achota. If a regular Yisrael, meaning not a Kohen, that's why we're saying it, sleeps with his sister, which of course is a prohibition in the Torah, right? Yisrael haba al achoto, zona mashvili. That woman is called a zona because she had an inappropriate relationship, and therefore she can't marry a Kohen. But the question was, chalala mashvile or no mashvila? Does she become a halal as well, a halala, or does she not become a halala? Mi amrinan, do you say it's a kal v'chomer michayve lavin, right? That kal v'chomer, sorry, there's a kal v'chomer. That michayve lavin, if a Kohen sleeps with a divorcee, which is only an Isser lav, right? A Kohen with a grusha. But the offspring, or not the offspring, the woman herself becomes a halala, right? Michayve lavin havi halala. A woman who sleeps with someone she can't sleep with midarabana mi lotase, meaning a almanat to Kohen Gadol or grusha to Kohen Hedyot, she becomes a halal. So this person who slept with her sister, her brother, which is a chayvei kritut, lo kol shekain, or do you say, oh Dilma, well, there's no Kohanim involved here, right? That's a Kohen sleeping with a grusha, or a Kohen Gadol sleeping with an almanah. But here it's a regular Yisrael doing a prohibition. And ein halala ela mi isur kuna. You only have a halala from an isur kuna, right? Of course, one of the questions is why would it matter? But that's one of the questions. Amar, so he answered him, you're right. That's in fact the way it is. Ein halala ela mi isur kuna bilvad. There's only a halala from a relationship involving a prohibition to a Kohen, not other relationships. So regular things that the Torah prohibits, like, for example, Eshet Ish is a good example too, but certainly a person with their siblings, there's anything like that, is a prohibition. It's an Isser Karet. It doesn't make the woman into a Halala. Amar Rava. Now said Rava, Minah HaMilta. How do we know that? Amar Rabbanan Halal and Isser Kuna. The Tanya. Based on the following Braita, which comes from the Torah Kohanim, it says here on the side in Parshat Emor. It said, which of course is where you'd expect it, right? That's where we talk about all these prohibitions. Says the Torah Kohanim the following: Lo Yomar Grusha b'Kohen Gadol. Says the Braita, maybe it shouldn't have said that a Kohen Gadol cannot marry a Grusha. Now, where did it say that? Remember, it says Almanah Grusha v'Chalala Zona lo yikach by Kohen Gadol. Says the Braita, it shouldn't have told me that. It should have forgone the mention of Grusha by Kohen Gadol. The Tainti b'Kal v'Chomer, I would have learned it out from a very easy Kal v'Chomer, Kohen Hedyot, right? I would have said, Anamina, Hashta, the Kohen Hedyot Asura. The Torah says the Kohen Hedyot cannot marry a Grusha, divorced woman. The Kohen Gadol, boy, you need to tell me the Kohen Gadol can't marry. He's a Kohen Hedyot, and he's a Kohen Gadol. Lama Nemra. So why did it tell us again that a Kohen Gadol cannot marry a Grusha? To tell you that Keshem Shechaluka Grusha Mizona v'Chalala b'Kohen Hedyot. Just like a Grusha has a separate category than a Zona and Chalala by Kohen Hedyot, Kach Chaluka b'Kohen Gadol. So too, it's different by Kohen Gadol, and basically there's different categories of a Grusha and a Chalala Zona. Okay, says the Gemara, Kach Chaluka b'Kohen Gadol. Pshita Migragara. Right now, we understand that obviously it's a separate category, meaning it's a weaker category, right? Ask him Pshita, that's obvious, Migragara, because why should it be worse, right? Meaning, why should a Kohen Gadol be less than a Kohen Hedyot? Ella, really what it's telling you is the following, 4 or 5 lines from the bottom. Kishem shechaluka grusha mizona v'chalala b'Kohen Hedyot. Just like a grusha is different and has a different status than a zona and chalala by Kohen Hedyot, kach almana chaluka megusha v'chalala zona b'Kohen Gadol. Why? Chalala lama nemra. Just like why? So then, why did you say chalala if you already know that a Kohen Hedyot can't marry a chalala? Why did you say Kohen a chalala by Kohen Gadol? Ein chalala elam yisr kuna. Right? It's to tell you that the only case that you have Chalala is if it's involved a relationship that's usher to a Kohen, meaning a Kohen Gadol with an Almanah or a Kohen Hedyot with a Grusha, but not a regular prohibition of a man not allowed to sleep with any of his relatives. Says Gemara Wilson in Zona Lama Namra. The 4th case is, right? Remember, it says Almanah, Grusha, Zona, Halala, Zona. So Halala is to tell you that it's different, right? The Halala only comes from prohibitions of Kohen that are Grusha or Almanah. But why do you say the word Zona? Zona Lama Nemra. So why does it say Zona specifically again by Kohen Gadol? I would know that for sure, right? Says the Gemara, because Nemra Kan Zona, Nemra Lehalan Zona. It says Zona by Kohen Gadol. It says Zona by Kohen Hedyot. That's the Lehalan, that you can't do it. Ma Kan Zaro Chulin, Af Lehalan Zaro Chulin. It's telling you, right, that not only remember that it only says the word Lo Yichalel, that the children will become Chulin by a Kohen Gadol. It doesn't say that by Kohen Hedyot. By Kohen Hedyot, it just says don't sleep with her. It doesn't say, and the children will be Chalalim. So that's to tell you, it's an extra word basically to tell you that just like there's an extra word Zona by Kohen Gadol, to tell you to compare it to Kohen Hedyot, just like by Kohen Gadol, the children are Chulin, so too by Kohen Hedyot, the children are Chulin, meaning they're Chalalim. Ravashi, Hilkach Kohen Haba Achoto. Sorry, I gotta get the next word. Zona Mashvile, Chalala Lo Mashvile, right? Period. If a Kohen sleeps with his sister, he makes her into a Zona, but he does not make her into a Halal because, as we just learned, it's a prohibition, it's an Isser Doraita, it's an Isser of Karet, but it doesn't make her into Halal. But, important point, because he slept with her, she was called a Zona. She had a prohibition of someone she's not allowed to sleep with, right? And therefore, if he slept with her a second time, Chazaru Ba'ala, the second line, Asa Halala, then she wouldn't become a Halala, because since this is now an Isser Kuhuna, because Zona is a specific Isser to Kohen, that Yisrael can marry a Zona, presumably. We discussed that before, but a Kohen cannot, and therefore he is can make her into Halala with the second Bia. And therefore the offspring, if they had any children, would be Mamzerim, but they would also be Chalalim. Okay? And so we will stop there. I think Dovas can pick it up tomorrow on the second line on Daf Ayin Chet. And God willing, I'll be back next Motzei Shabbat to do Bava Kama. Sorry. So we'll pick it up from there. Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov, Yasher Koach. Be
Thank
safe.
you. Thank you.